And I'm gonna get my captions going. Okay, and I think we are ready to go. I'm gonna share my screen. Please enjoy the cute picture of my dog. I'm going to post in the chat the slides that I'm using because I'll ask you to refer to them a little bit later, and I'll get my slides going. So I asked you all to post in the chat an emoji that represents how you feel. This is how I'm feeling, right? Like I'm here, I'm ready, I'm counted, count me in, but my head is very small, right? Like I'm doing my best, okay? So this is kind of what represents what I am, how I'm feeling, but I'm feeling energized with y'all here today. So please feel free throughout the presentation to stop me, to ask questions. I would ask if you could just unmute yourself and participate. I don't have a chat monitor for this session, so it's kind of hard to monitor the chat and do the presentation. So, if it just suits you better to use the chat, I'll try to monitor it the best that I can. But I would really appreciate if you could just unmute yourself.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yes,
Thank
Terry, are
you.
you going to volunteer?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here for that. You probably
Thank
forgot
you
to
so.
ask me over a month ago.
Oh, did I? See, I
Yep,
forgot too. All
it's
right.
okay.
Thank you. Terry will be our chat monitor. Thank you so much, Terry. So, culturally responsive and equity minded teaching practices. So, again, now we're moving to the step of you've got your data, you've looked at your data. Now it's time to make some choices, right? Which class am I going to choose, right? To make that effort, right? To increase student success among Black students. And what practice am I going to implement? So the agenda for today, we're going to start by acknowledging equity gaps, talk a little bit about what that might look like, what that might feel like now that you have your data. We'll do a basic overview of the culturally responsive pedagogy in terms of its perspective, its outlook, right? And we'll do that in terms of the equity-minded approach as well. Then we'll dig into the specific culturally relevant pedagogical options and equity-minded options that you have. And there's three categories, right? There's looking to make changes in your curriculum, looking to make changes in terms of your grading policy, and incorporating what we call grading equity. And then the third option is looking into using open educational resources in your course. So those are the three kind of general categories, and then we'll dig in and talk about what those specific options look like. If we have time, I'll talk about some suggested readings if you really want to dig in to the mindset, and then we'll talk about what is next. This is something that I want you to think about as we move through this session. We're going to talk about a lot of different options that you have. And so I don't want people to get overwhelmed. Remember that we are asking you to choose one course and implement one practice, right? So we're giving you a menu of options tonight, but we're not expecting you to completely overhaul all your courses or even one course. We want you to choose one course and one practice to implement, one and one, right? So don't get overwhelmed by the presentation of the options that you have. Okay, so now you have your data, right? So now we can acknowledge the equity gaps that exist in our courses. Can I get one or two people to talk about what it was like, what kind of response they had to looking at the Black student success rate for their courses? Are there one or two people that could quickly share what that was like?
I don't mind sharing, but I
Go
shared it
ahead.
before. I didn't see any consistency. I teach the same class, different different classes, sometimes in the same semester, and opposite results. So
Okay.
as I said before, I feel like there are a lot of other factors, and I struggle with it every day because
Yeah,
there's things that are beyond my control, and it sometimes affect, it just happened to be in one class or the other. And
right.
also, I talked about the culture in the class, that sometimes it's, if the group is forming kind of a support group, then it's more likely that they will stick to it. But sometimes the support group decide we're gonna quit or something. It's
Yeah,
too hard. We're just not gonna do it.
yeah. Okay, thank you, Verette. One more person to share.
Um, it's
Yeah.
Nefertiti. Hi, everyone. I found that even with untimed assessments, students still ask for more time. They could have, 2 weeks notice, 3 weeks notice, and then we get to the due date and it just a lot of issues, a lot of barriers to why they couldn't finish their work on time. So I had one particular student and she needed the extra time, so I gave it to her, and ultimately she did really well. So it wasn't an issue of ability, and it wasn't an issue of whether or not she understood the material. I think that so many of the students just have so many other things going on in their lives
Mm-hmm.
that education is really not a high priority.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to speak to that, right? And what that might look like for our Black students in particular. For other people, right? When you look at those numbers, right? When you look at the percentages, chances are you are seeing racial equity gaps, right? You are seeing lower success rates among Black students. The reality is that you might feel disappointed seeing this. You might feel surprised, right? Like, oh my God, in my class, I try so hard to like meet all students where they're at. And it might make you a little sad because you're a human and you're a professor and you came here to help students, right? And we're at a community college where we know the students need us more, right? So it's good to recognize that those are normal reactions, right? To have to seeing those kinds of gaps. We want to encourage you to experience your emotions mindfully, right? Don't wallow in it and don't get defensive, right? Don't say, well, I've tried everything, all hope is lost, there's nothing for me to do, right? There's always something for you to do, right? The hope is not lost. Don't lose hope. Lose hope for other things, but not in our students, right? So being open to trying more, right? You've tried several things, but you haven't tried all the things, right? So be open to doing that. Believe in the data, right? Sometimes we see data that doesn't align with what we assume, and our gut reaction is to say, well, that can't be true. I teach sociology, and a lot of times I'll provide data to students that doesn't align with their personal experience or their view. And so they're so quick to say, well, the data has to be wrong. The data is the data, right? Believe in the data, right? And use it to help you, get better in terms of meeting student need. So remember, like Vered said, the equity gaps among Black students is a campus, district, national issue, right? This is not just something that you're experiencing or we're experiencing here at West LA College. This is something that we're seeing across the nation. So the gaps that you see are not your fault, right? But they are your responsibility, right, to address. And that's what we're here to do. So just to give a quick snapshot, a quick idea of contextually, how can we understand why Black students don't succeed as much as other students? I provide a little snapshot of obstacles. My assistant, he wants to get into it. Okay, so there's a report called The Basic Needs Among California Community College Students. It's a report that was published in 2023. I put the slides in the chat, and as you can see at the bottom of the slide, I have all the sources hyperlinked, right? So you can access them. So this is statewide data. So this is not just for students. But look at the food insecurity rate, between 60 to 70% for Black people in California. The overall rate is 47%. Housing insecurity rate around 70% for Black people in California. Statewide, it's about 58%. And the homelessness rate is almost 40% for Black people, and it's about 24% statewide. So you could imagine each one of these being a huge obstacle, right, for our students in terms of being successful in our colleges. There's also the State of Higher Education report that came out this year. And this is looking specifically at Black students or students. And then they had a subset, they looked at Black students in higher ed. Okay, so this is looking at our students. Black students are more likely to experience racial discrimination in higher education than their non-Black peers. They're more likely than any other group to have a full-time job while they're pursuing their higher education. And they're more than any other racial group to have significant family caregiving and wage earning responsibilities, right? So again, just to give us that context, right? Because we don't want to think that Black students just don't want to succeed or are lazy or don't value education, right? They're here, right? They want it, right? So, but I think it's important for us to be able to contextualize this. I also found the LACCD Basic Needs Survey. I couldn't find the latest one. The latest one I could find was from 2021. But Black students were the most likely to experience food insecurity in our district, almost 80%, and homelessness at a rate of 30%. So again, a quick snapshot, right? Why are we seeing these gaps? And again, it's not just us, it's not just our campus or district, it's nationwide. And these are some of the reasons why. Okay, so let's jump into talking about clarifying for our purposes a couple of concepts that we will refer to. So the first is pedagogy, right?
Tiffany,
So
Can
yeah,
we stop just a second on that? Is there any way we can do to help with? I'm sure I had a brilliant student in my class that became homeless during the semester, and he couldn't come anymore, so I had to drop him because
right.
he wouldn't pass, and it's just not possible without being in the labs. Is there any way we can first address those things, because we can't even get to them if they can't
Right.
come to class? If they, how am I going to save that student? I communicate. I try
Yeah.
through the basic needs, through different things to help, but we say, oh, we need to save this many students just to move the needle. But how can we do that if we happen to have students in our class that are homeless or falling into homelessness during the semester?
Absolutely. So what we can do is connect them with the resources that we have, like you said, the basic needs, right? There's a whole document, right, that we have for students that you can provide to them that talk about where they can get assistance with shelter, temporary, long-term. So those are the things that you can do right now. The other thing that we can do is try to make our courses adaptable, right? So that it can meet students where they're at, right? So a student who is dealing with housing insecurity probably needs to be able to turn in some stuff late.
Oh, I
Right?
don't mind.
Because, hold on, Varette, just for time,
Yeah,
right? Probably need to turn in some things late, right? So I'm not talking about you personally, but there are policies that we can put in place and being more flexible, and that's part of what you'll see today, that could help students who are dealing with those different types of life situations that can hopefully also help them still be successful. Elena, your hand was up. Go ahead.
Yes, in the previous slide, at the bottom, you have a reference that it said African Americans in LACCD. Is that an independent report or is that part of the basic needs report?
That's a separate report.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
So pedagogy, right? We all talk about it, we do it, but what are we really referring to? It's our method or practice of teaching. So let me ask you, how did you learn how to teach? Did
I'm
you?
emulating my favorite professors.
Okay, so Elena, go ahead, and then Stella.
Oh, just like, our teaching program was like week 1 of school, you're learning method and teaching at the same time. So it was like trial and error, trial and error.
Trial and error.
A lot
Okay,
of feedback
Stella.
and
Yeah,
and
Stella, what
group
about
work.
for you?
Mhm.
My first teaching experience happened before I ever took a pedagogy class, and it was at West LA College in 2008. And I emulated the professors who impacted me the most.
Okay, what about for you, Christopher?
Oh, I just what everybody else was saying. I mean, honestly, I didn't learn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the when you go through graduate school, you're just learning how to be a graduate student. So
Right.
just on the fly, trial and error, uh, taking courses that were designed around pedagogy. That's really it, really.
Yeah, I love what
And,
you
that,
said.
and you know, especially when
I
you don't
did it.
come from like a language mechanics background, if you're in the social
Mm-hmm.
sciences, they really don't teach us how to teach, right? They just sort of throw us in there.
Yeah.
We have to learn.
What about for you, Victor?
TAing in grad school, seeing,
Mhm.
emulating what my dissertation advisor and other professors did.
Okay, and what about for you, Lisa?
So my experience, I went through a teacher credentialing program. I am a former special education teacher, but I was teaching high school at the time, adult students actually, age 16 through 24. But the program that I was going to was designed for multiple subject, which is like elementary. So it was totally not relevant for the population that I was teaching. It did have a lot of emphasis on reading instruction, but I would say that was like the biggest benefit. But otherwise, it was pretty irrelevant to my current practice.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from a lot of folks is that we learned pedagogy from others, right? We learned it through the TA experience or what we experienced. Um, and so we kind of just learned how to teach by being taught what was passed down to us, right? Without doing much critical analysis, right? So without much actual, looking at it course wise or theoretically, thinking about it, applying it, right? Just doing what we saw or what we were told, right? As TAs. Stella mentioned that, for her, she did things that worked for her, as a student or as a TA or as a graduate student, right? What I saw that worked for me, that's what I employed. But also remember, we should not be using ourselves as the standard, okay? Y'all, we are atypical. We are educators. We love this stuff, right? We are passionate, right, about our fields. Not to say that we don't want to encourage students to be that, but that's not most students. Most people are not weirdos like us, right? And want to delve and spend all this time and money, right? Learning a specific discipline, right? And then turning around and doing what? Teaching it to other people. We cannot use ourselves as the standard, right? So things that work for us may not necessarily work for your typical student who's here to earn credits, to learn, to grow, right? But not necessarily to go to graduate school, right? Not to necessarily teach the discipline. And so I think that's really important for us to keep in mind. We're also going to talk a lot about curriculum. So when we think about curriculum, a lot of times I think we think, oh, the course outline of record and what you're supposed to teach. But we want to think about curriculum in a more holistic way, right? The totality of student experiences that occur in the educational process. So this is including things like instructional resources, methods, assignments, methods of assessment, lessons, and other academic content. It also includes the standards that we create and goals for student learning. So get into some of the specific. This would include things like syllabi, reading materials, lessons, quizzes, exams, the way we structure our classes, how we manage our classes, etc. Sorry, I have to go back and forth to admit people. So when we think about curriculum, we want to think about it from this kind of holistic perspective, right? Not just in terms of the content that we're teaching, right? But the totality of the student experience. So we're going to look at two different approaches, right? This session is titled Culturally Responsive and Equity-Minded practices, right? So let's start with culturally responsive pedagogy. Let's start there. We're going to build a foundation for what this is, what it means to take an equity-minded approach, and then we'll dig into the specific options within those categories. So when we speak about, sorry, if I didn't miss somebody else. When we speak about culturally responsive pedagogy, right, what are we referring to? So this was a pedagogical approach that was created by a scholar named Geneva Gay in the year 2000. And her argument was that when academic knowledge and skills are situated within the lived experiences and frame of references for students, right, this is beneficial to students. And this approach also recognizes the importance of including students' cultural references in all aspects of learning. The benefits of this is that academic materials become personally meaningful for students. They have a high interest appeal and is learned more easily, right? Because it's within their frame of reference and experiences. It also can create a greater sense of belonging for students and can lead to more engagement. So let's hear from Dr. Gay as she speaks about the importance of culturally responsive pedagogy.
For me, there's several different reasons. One of them, you can categorize these reasons into academic or learning. You can talk about psychological reasons. You can talk about social and political reasons. You can even talk about historical reasons. And I think the underlying message behind all of those is that issues of diversity are always present in our lives, whether they're individual lives or cultural lives or action lives, whatever the actions happen to be. So if that's indeed the case, and if you're talking about the educational enterprise, you want to make that much more effective and successful for students from different cultural frames of reference. And if it is indeed true that the education process is a cultural process too, so that then makes it it's incumbent then for educators at all levels, whether it's elementary, secondary, higher ed, to include cultural responsiveness so that we can, if you will, nuance our curriculum, our instruction, how we interact with students in such a way that we are sensitive to their cultural frames of references. With the idea being is that as learners, we all, and as teachers too, the technical tasks that we're wanting to do, the information we want to, as instructors, transmit to students and we want students to learn, to master, those things are always filtered through some cultural lenses. And in most cases, that cultural lens tend to reflect the dominant group in society. So what we're talking about in cultural responsive teaching is then to make sure that other cultural lenses are accepted as legitimate, as natural, normal, routine, that we send instructional and learning messages through those cultural filters to students from different ethnic backgrounds. Whether those students happen to be of Asian, African, European, Native or indigenous or Latino heritage, because all of those folks then are socialized in different cultural frames of references that affect how they go about the learning process. So the argument then follows that if we do cultural responsive teaching for students who are ethnically, racially, and culturally different, then they have a better chance to perform at a higher level of academic achievement.
All right, so that's a resource that I've placed in the Canvas page if you want to watch the rest of it. But I think she provides a very good kind of overview, justification of why she came up with this concept and why it can be beneficial specifically for students of color. And obviously for our purposes, right, we're looking to increase student success among Black students. So in general, what are the ways that we can accomplish a culturally responsive pedagogy? And there are several different kind of approaches to this. One is by including material by diverse authors that specifically reflects students' background. And for our purpose, right, we want to especially do that for our Black students. And this is as opposed to teaching material that is widely accepted as classic, and often white scholars, right? So we want to make a conscious effort, right, to include Black authors, right, and Black researchers and scholars, right, so that our students can make that connection. We want to make sure that we're also including material that reflects the experiences of diverse students, again, for our purpose, especially Black students. And this is in opposition to teaching events as if they affect all racial groups in the same way, or worse, centering the experiences of white people, right? So a quick example of this is, let's say we're teaching something in economics about a recession, and we're looking at the unemployment rates, right? If we just give overall unemployment rates and how they change before and after the recession, we're not really connecting to the fact that racial and ethnic groups probably have different rates of unemployment, right? And we're probably going to see higher rates among groups of color. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about things in our courses, we're connecting it, right, to the diverse experiences and not just painting a generalized view. We also, in order to achieve this pedagogy, right, it's about making sure that the classroom is a collaborative experience that includes the students as active contributors, right? And this is in opposition to the traditional model where the teacher is treated as the sole authority figure and the only source of important knowledge. So that's culturally responsive pedagogy in a nutshell, nice little foundation. Now we're going to talk about an equity-minded approach, what that looks like in terms of teaching practices. When you have an equity-minded approach, this means that whenever you see an equity gap, action is required, right? Action on your part, right? This sense of responsibility to address those gaps. What we're looking at are racial equity gaps, right? The disparities among racial ethnic groups, focusing on the what we tend to see are the lower success rate of Black students in our courses. And what does it mean when we see them, when we take an equity-minded approach? It means that our current pedagogy is not effectively supporting all students, right? It's not resulting, right, in helping all students be successful. And so when we take an equity-minded approach, it means that we're moving from the perspective of what did the students do wrong to how can I better serve the students that need me the most, right? And this is about meeting the students where they are. Again, understanding that that snapshot that we saw about Black students and their experiences, food insecurity, housing insecurity, experiences of discrimination in higher ed, right? And we're making sure that our courses are reflecting the fact that we're trying to directly reach those students. And just to remind you, our vision statement here at West LA College is we say that we're a pathway to success for every student, right? We don't say it's just for students who are prepared, students who came from great schools, students who are middle class, students who can afford textbooks. No, we said what? For every student, right? So we want our courses to reflect that, and an equity-minded approach helps us do that. Okay, quick reminder, right? You might be saying, oh, that's so much. I got to make sure my material is reflective. I got to make sure I'm demonstrating or connecting diverse experiences. I got to address equity gaps. We're just providing a menu and an overview. 1 and 1, right? One course, one practice. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the actual options that you have in terms of implementing a new practice into your course in spring. So option number 1 reflects the culturally responsive pedagogy. right? It's about creating culturally responsive curriculum. Now, remember, when we're speaking about curriculum, we're thinking of, again, the totality of students' experiences. So not just content-wise, right? But how we manage our classrooms, how we structure them, our syllabi, our policies, right? All of those things. So when we're taking this approach and trying to adapt our curriculum, right, to make sure that it's culturally responsive so that it will result in higher success rate for Black students, here are some questions that we can use to guide us to make those changes, okay? So, how does my curriculum reflect intentional efforts to engage diverse and our underrepresented populations? And again, for our purpose, especially Black students, right? Where do I see that effort, right? That I'm making, right? To engage Black students in my classes. How does my curriculum acknowledge the perspectives and or voids of Black perspectives and experiences? Again, where can I point to in my course that I am doing that, right? And doing that consistently? What did I take into consideration in choosing my course materials to increase Black student success in my course? How does my syllabus reflect the desire to foster an inclusive classroom community, especially for Black students? How do my course materials reflect my current students, especially Black students? So these are just some guiding questions, right, that we can use to analyze, right, and look at our current curriculum for whatever course that you're going to choose and say, is my curriculum culturally responsive, right? How am I answering these questions? And if I'm answering, no, it doesn't do it, or I haven't done it, or I don't see where I could say that I've made that intentional effort, that's where we can make those changes. So this is option number 1, okay? Option number 2 is to employ some equitable grading practices, right? Transforming our grading practices. So with equitable grading, the goal is that in the end, our grades are based on the student's level of academic mastery, right? Have they learned the material and at what level, right? It's not about how often do they come to class? How often do they raise their hand in class? Did they take time to do the extra credit? Did they come to every single class, right? It's about boiling the grade down to, did the student understand the material, right? And at what level did they understand it? So there are a few different grading policies, right, that we can put in place that reflect equitable grading practices. Again, these are options, right? Something here might speak to you, might not speak to you, okay? But one policy change that we can make is to allow late assignments without asking for permission. What is the rationale here from an equitable grading perspective? Guess what, y'all? Students are people. I don't know if you knew that, okay? And things happen to people, especially those from marginalized communities like Black students. Like we saw with that snapshot, Black students often have additional responsibilities, such as family and work, and this can affect their ability to turn in all their assignments on time. Black students are more likely to experience hostile educational environments, more likely to experience things like imposter syndrome, like they don't belong in higher education. And this can hinder their ability to reach out to their faculty member and to communicate with them. Now, these policies are not black and white. They're not an all or nothing, right? There are a range of options that you can apply. So you could say, okay, I'm going to allow students to turn in late work within a 2-week time period, within a week time period of it being due, right? You could do that all the way to, I'm going to let students turn in work until the end of the session. I'll accept all late work, right, until the end of the session. So don't think about it as an all or nothing. Oh, well, now I got to just let everybody turn in anything. And no, start with baby steps if you need to. You know what? I'm going to extend my late policy so students have 2 weeks after the due date to turn it in, right? You can play around with it, right? You can start slow, right? And then see how things go. Some other options that reflect equitable grading, allowing open note or book exams. Some of this is relevant just to face-to-face or online or both, right? So textbooks and notes are resources and should be treated as such. There are very few real-world examples where we're not allowed to use our resources in the moment. Memorization does not equal intelligence, right? And so this is a viable option, right? That we know would result in more students being successful. Again, it's not all or nothing. Maybe you start by saying, I'm going to allow you to use notes that you've created based on the course material in the textbook, right? Like maybe you want to restrict the amount or type of resources that they can use, all the way to an unrestricted use, right, of resources. So again, not black or white. Allowing redos of assignments and exams without asking for permission. So the rationale behind this is that students don't have to get something right the first time to demonstrate that they understand the material. It may take some students longer, right, than others to get it. But remember, the goal in equitable grading is, has the student mastered the information? Do they understand it? If it takes them a little bit longer than other students, right, the perspective of equitable grading is that shouldn't matter, right? We shouldn't penalize students who it takes them a little bit longer, right, to get it. So if we think about this as it relates to Black students are more likely to come from underfunded schools that underprepared them for higher ed, right? And they might need more attempts, right, to demonstrate their mastery. Again, range of options. Maybe you only allow one redo the whole session. That's where you start, right? I will allow every student gets one opportunity, right, to redo an assignment this semester, all the way to students can redo all the assignments as many times as they need throughout the semester, right? Again, it's a range of options here. It's not black and white. Okay. Another example is assigning 50% credit for missing assignments. This is the one that trips people up, so don't trip, y'all, okay? So the rationale is that earning a 50% is still a failing grade. Think about the grading scale, 0 to 100. Why is half the scale a fail? Right? Out of 0 to 100, why is half a fail, right? So assigning a 50% instead of a 0 reduces the negative impact, right, that it has on their grade and can help encourage students to stick with the course, right? So if they see they got a 0 on an assignment, they may throw their hands up and say, well, you know, oh, well, I'm going to quit. Like there's no point in me continuing. But if it's a 50%, they may feel like, hey, I'm 50% there, right? If I do my other assignments, I can still pass this course, right? Because I got a 50% instead of a 0. Range of options. Maybe you say 25% for missing assignments, right? 10%. And maybe you say only for one, right? That's the conservative start, right? To all the way at the end, just 50% for any missing assignment. Again, range of options here. Okay, so that was 2, the equitable grading, okay? The third option is using open educational resources. Okay, so removing cost as a barrier to success. So y'all, I've been teaching since like 2005, right? So what am I, like 19 years in? I'm gonna mute. Okay, so I remember early open educational resources. I remember free textbooks back in the day. They were terrible. They were awful. They were crunchy, right? We are like 15, 16 years in now. For a lot of our courses, a lot of intro level courses, right? We teach lower level courses. A lot of those courses now, there's not only one pretty good book, there's options that we have now, right? The state put a lot of money into the creation of open educational resources. So if you only thought about it during the time when it was crunchy, right? And you just wrote off OER, right? Open educational resources, and you have not returned to see the improvement in the quality of these resources, I really want to encourage you to do so because they are a lot better than they were at the beginning. So obviously this is an issue because textbooks are, this is the key word, unnecessarily expensive, right? Like they're exploiting students, honestly, right? When they change 1-2 things and then they say there's a whole nother edition of the book, right? We don't want to participate in the exploitation of students, especially when now there are so many free open resources that are available to use, right? So we don't want lack of having the material, of having their textbooks. We don't want that to be a barrier, right, for their success in our courses, okay? Now, I want to ask a question. A lot of people know that OER is about free textbooks, right? It's open, it's free to anybody, anybody can access it. But what's the other part of open? What else does it mean that these are open educational resources? Does anybody know what that means beyond it just being free?
More people participate in making it.
People participate in making it. And guess who else can participate?
People that traditionally are not.
Well, you, me, Whitney, Natalie, Glorian, right? All of us can participate. And I don't mean in terms of creating your own textbook. You can do that. There's funds and money out there to do that. But what it means that these materials are open is that they are adaptable. So you can take an OER resource for your biology class that's already been created. The foundation is there, and you can go in there and customize it and make it more inclusive and relevant to your students. Right? That's a key part of the open part of open educational resource that a lot of people forget. Yes, that means it's free and it's accessible to everybody, but that also means it's adaptable, right? So not only can you get it and use it and it's free for your students, you can adapt the pictures, the content, right? To make sure that it's connecting with your students. So you can customize the material to make it more inclusive and more relevant, again, to your students, specifically Black students, right? If you're using OER material, you can also assess it, okay, by using the Academic State Senate of California Community Colleges IDEA framework. So this is a review framework that they've created to evaluate OER. There's actual rubrics that they've created that you can assess your books, your materials to see, do they reflect IDEA? And IDEA stands for inclusive, diverse, equitable, and anti-racist, okay? Can I tell y'all a little something, a shameless plug? I am the IDEA framework lead for the ASCCC. Okay, so if this is something that you're interested, you have a resource right here at your campus, okay? And I've got that resource published for you in our Canvas page, but you also just directly have access to me as well, okay? So this is the third option. Now, adapting a textbook is a lot, right? We're not expecting you between now and spring to fully revamp a textbook, right? But we would love if some people took the option of changing their textbook and commit to using an OER textbook, right? And maybe the first semester you just use it so you can get used to it and see where the holes are. And then you slowly, maybe just chapter by chapter, start making those changes, start customizing it to make sure that it's inclusive, right? And it's relevant to your students. So again, don't get overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, she's asking us to take OER and no, first, just adopt the OER first, right? And then next step could be, okay, now let me dig in. Now that I'm accustomed to it, dig in and start adapting it and making sure that it's culturally relevant, okay? One and done, one and one, y'all. One and one. Okay. So again, let's not get overwhelmed. All right. One and one. So let me stop right here and see if there are any questions, clarifications, and then we're going to move to some group discussion. Okay. Christopher, your hand shot up.
Yeah, Tiffany, just real quick, you're saying the OER textbook, we can adapt it. Just to be clear, are you saying that we can edit it?
Yes.
Okay, so not just like adding module content in the Canvas shell, but specifically editing the actual OER textbook.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you can edit it. Now it doesn't edit the version that everybody accesses. Right? But you can get your own copy that you can edit for your use.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Other folks, questions, clarifications before we jump into some group work?
My question is, once they leave my class and go to another instructor or go to the next pathway in this school, then what? I mean, I guess you expect us to have everyone in the program or our division try to take up some of the same practices and try to sustain that. I guess my main question for the whole thing is, I like to see them graduate. Getting past my class is not as tough as finishing the whole thing. So how can I help sustain them for completion?
Yeah, our goal with this grant has been to try to get folks involved from every single division on campus so that the people who are participating can go back to their divisions and talk about what they're doing, what's working, what they've learned. So we made a very intentional effort to reach out to every single division. And I do believe we have at least one person now up to this point from every single division on campus. And yeah, that's what we want y'all to do, is to go back to talk to your divisions and share with them what you've learned, what works, what doesn't, and what resources you have. So when you do your implementation assessment at the end of spring, right after you've implemented and you're reflecting, we definitely take the time to encourage you to go back into your divisions and talk about your experience and encourage your colleagues, right, to get on board. All right, anybody else? Anything in the chat, Terry? Any questions in there?
No, just people, Dr. Battle specifically, posting resources and ways that people can get in touch with Ryan Edwards or others in order to help get what they need as far as OER or other resources.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Battle. Thank you. Ryan is a great resource. He's our OER liaison. You see all those emails from him. You probably don't pay attention maybe, right? Because like, OER, what is that? What is that? Now you know, oh my God, OER, right? Like this is what we were talking about. And so he's a great resource. So thank you, Dr. Battle, for adding that to the chat. Okay, so I'm tired of talking. Are y'all tired of listening to me? Because I'm tired of hearing myself. Okay. So now it is time for y'all to talk to each other. Okay. So I'm going to post in the chat again for some of the folks that might have missed it. The slide presentation, because it has the stuff, okay, that you might want to refer to in your discussion. And this is what I want you to discuss. I'm also going to paste this in the chat. Oh, I am sending things to Leslie, not to everyone. Here are the questions. And here, let me get that again. Copy, paste. Everyone and everyone. Okay, perfect. So I want you to take one of the options that we talked about, right? So critically analyzing your curriculum, right? Let me go option 1, right? Or thinking about some equitable grading practices that you could employ, okay? Or adopting OER, right? Just making the switch from a textbook students have to pay for to a textbook that is open, right? Or taking it a step further and thinking about how you could adapt OER. Maybe you're already using OER. I know a lot of people are. So maybe the next step is adapting that OER, right? And customizing it to make it more relevant to your students. So I want you to discuss one of those options. This is just a brainstorming session. One of those options, and discuss how you could incorporate it into the class that you're thinking about implementing your new practice, right? Think about the advantage and disadvantage of this particular choice, right? No, nothing would be perfect to do, right? But what will be an advantage of using this? What would be a disadvantage? And what are some things you feel like you need to consider, things that you need to keep in mind, right? If you were going to implement this particular practice, all right? So I'm going to throw y'all into groups. Let's see. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to have this discussion amongst yourselves. How many people are in here total?
29.
29. Okay. So if we did 10 breakout rooms, that would be like roughly 3, right? Okay, y'all. I know I did social, but I did qualitative methods, okay, not quantitative, okay? All right, so I'm going to open them up. Y'all will jump in there, 10 minutes to have this discussion. We'll come back out and share out from a few people.
I don't know how to do that.
Are y'all seeing the, okay, I see y'all moving. Oh, shoot. Kyle, oh my God, I haven't seen you in forever. Come back.
Oh,
How
it's
you-
just us. Okay.
Well,
I'm like, why are you talking to the whole person or what?
no, I need to see you.
I know. I was just telling Victor how much I love you.
Aw, feelings mutual.
How are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same here.
We're going, we're doing,
Yeah.
I know. In the back of my head, I just keep thinking like,
Yeah.
how long are we even going to be able to do this?
What do you mean? Oh,
The new
because
administration.
yes, yes.
Yeah, but anyway, that's how my students. So
Oh,
y-
caught you
usually,
in the middle of a thought, Eulace.
oh, okay, no problem. I'm just saying, my students look like from semester to semester, they know how to get the book. Nobody
Oh.
even question about me, and they have their own book, and I don't need to. But I do have one question is, I think that correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
Is this meeting the major thing is trying to help like a Black student to make sure they can success? One of the
Yes.
question is because I'm teaching West, and you can see that in the West, the computer science department right now, I would say 80% of the classes
Uh-huh.
are online, asynchronous. Okay.
Yes.
So I before the pandemic, I teach at school every Saturday. But
Right.
now because I'm teaching online and asynchronous, so I just don't know
Yeah.
how to
Look,
ask a
I know-
student, are you a Black student?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's a very fair question. We get that question a lot. So
yeah.
we opened this session to the whole campus,
Yeah.
but most of the people here are participating in a particular grant, right?
Okay.
That
Yeah.
you can still join. So it's not too late to join. And so what we're telling people is, we want you to implement a practice that you believe will directly help Black students.
Right.
But we're not asking you to only apply it to your Black students. You're
I
going to
see.
implement it in your course,
Okay.
right? And so
Okay.
chances are more students are going to benefit, right? It's probably not just going to benefit Black students, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the goal is to increase Black student success. But absolutely, we're not asking you to identify Black students and offer something to them that you're not offering to all students.
Okay. Yeah, because actually, for whatever reason, okay, like I'm an adjunct, right? I
Mhm.
work at a defense company. My best coworker, the best talent, are Black.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
like yesterday, I got an email from our department. One of my students graduated here and attending USC
Mhm.
and achieve a very high the technical award, and award is being given out by the president of USC.
Wow.
And then they send out the name of the student, and somehow somebody pointed out that student, say that is the Black student in the middle of the picture. And I
Uh-huh.
look at that, oh, that was one of my best students in the class. I didn't even know.
Mhm.
I didn't even know
Mhm.
he's a Black. You know what I mean?
Right. So yeah.
I feel my classes, is actually, I think
Well,
for
here's the
whatever.
thing. This in the
Yeah.
interest of time, I'm gonna stop you because I want to hear from other people.
Right.
But if you join our program, one of the
Right.
things that you're going to be asked to do is to request your own equity data. So you might have an assumption, you believe your Black students are doing well, but you
Right.
don't know unless you get that data. So
I
the
see.
people in the program have requested their equity data so that they can see, are Black students succeeding in my class at the same rate as other students? Overall, for the campus, the answer is no. For most faculty, the answer is going to be no. But it's not too late to join. So definitely, I'll put my email in the chat towards the end for folks who want to join our efforts. So let me
Okay.
hear from a few other people. What kind of things came up in your discussion of, maybe implementing one of these practices into your course? Anybody want to share?
I'll hop in if no one else does. My good friend Carlos and I think we came in together. He's in aviation and I'm in film production. We share the same building, and we're going to share the same policy with giving the 50% for the non-submission of work, so we don't penalize the students. Actually, I started doing that last year based off the previous year cohort that you discussed that. And it actually has saved some students, a couple of them. And I liked how Carlos shared that some in aviation specifically, that his best students are actually the Black students.
Mhm.
They pull them aside and ask for more help and instructions, which I'm always curious how other departments are doing. So salute to my partner Carlos for sharing it, and I'll check back in with him and see how it's going.
Yes, and I want to challenge you, Imhotep, since you already did the 50%, we want
Yeah.
you to do something new. So we want you to add maybe one more, since maybe the equitable grading practices is something that you've seen some success in. Maybe add another element that we talked about, the redoing of assignments, expanding the accepting late assignments. Add something new, right? So then you can reassess at the end of spring and say, did that help even more? All right.
I accept that challenge. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Kathy, please.
Yeah. Hey, Tiffany. Hi, everybody. So I had one quick question. This term, I wanted to do something different. Last year, I did the 50%, and my numbers definitely went up. I saw a clear difference in the data. And so I'm wondering, I'm an English professor, everybody, so you have to help me out. In the interest of having clean data, I should not do the 50% this term and implement a new one, because the one I want to implement is having assignments due. I'm going to try something fairly radical. Actually, I like to do radical because I like to really see if it makes a difference. I've always accepted late work, but I don't publicize it. So this term, I was going to try something very radical in one class and have all my assignments with due dates, but open until the end of the term. And no permission request required, and just see what happens. And so I was thinking, to limit co-founding factors, I would maybe not do 50% for missing assignments, but just try this as like a clean sort of test. So I'm interested in feedback.
Yeah, so you could do that, or if it's possible, if you've done the 50% and it's a class that it's the same class you're going to teach in the spring, try adding it if possible. So you already know the 50% made a difference. Now let's add another policy change, right? And see if that makes even more of a difference, right?
Got it. Okay.
So I think if you can use the same class, then I think it's fine to start now adding layers, right?
Okay. Okay.
And I think what you're saying is so important, because like we said, for Black students, education has been hostile to a lot of them. They have imposter syndrome. Like, there's all these reasons why they might not reach out to you and say, hey, can I turn the assignment in late? So only the students that are doing that end up getting that benefit, right? So I think I think that's really awesome to think about. Okay, if it's a policy, let everybody know, right? That it is a policy. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kathy.
And I actually,
sorry.
Can I just say one last thing? I'm also thinking that, like, I spend a lot of time, I don't know about you guys, but it's an online course. This one I'm going to apply it to. And I spend a lot of time, I realized, going back in and reopening assignments for people. And so I actually think it may be, in some weird way, less work. I mean, there's a little more grading throughout, but that's good. I want students to turn in work. I don't want to be doing busy work. So this actually might be less work. We'll see. I'll report back. Don't worry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. All right, Chantal, let's hear from you.
So in our group, we were talking about some of the things that one things that we have chosen. And one of the things that I had struggled with that I tried this fall was having the due date being the due date for discussions, because discussions are more interactive for my students and I want them to make sure that they participate during that week, but opening up every other assignments except until due date. And then the question was, do I take points away if the students still turn in late work? And I went the opposite direction. I actually told my students that if they did turn their work in on time, that they would get an extra credit point for that for turning it on time. And then I panicked because I thought, oh my God, well, how am I going to know with all these different students turning in work at different times, how to manage that? And then for me, I realized that Canvas marks the students late if they turn it in after the due date, even though the accept until date is still possible.
Yeah.
So that saved me, Catherine, too, from having to go back when I hear a sad story from a student, that I'd have to go back, find that student, allow them to turn it in late. You know, that took time out of my schedule to go back at different random times. I found myself always going back and trying to adjust the calendar dates for individual students.
Right.
So now I don't have to do that anymore. And then also, instead of penalizing students for turning in late work, I incentivize students for trying to still turn it in on time.
I want to challenge you a little bit, Chantal, with that method, because the equitable grading approach really emphasizes grade students on their mastery of the work, right? So even though you're giving an incentive to students for turning it in on time by giving them additional credit, it's still in a way, it's penalizing, right, the students who aren't able to do so. And so again, if we want to think about using that equitable grading approach, really, what do we want to know? Do we want to know if the students are able to turn in every single thing on time consistently with all that we know, all that snapshot that we looked at, all these hardships and obstacles that our Black students are facing? Or do we want to know if they understand the material, right? Like, what should the grade be focused on? So I just want to leave that with you to think about, right? And
I'm kind of conflicted with that though, because I'm in real estate, and my thing is that in our profession, if you're late, you just cost your client $100,000.
I hear you.
So I don't want them to get in the habit of thinking that they can extend. Yeah, you can extend an escrow, but if I extend your loan lock rate, guess what? You're paying 3%, which is probably $20K.
Yeah.
So I want them to get into the mindset of, this is not the industry where you can do late. You have to be on time.
Right, because part of our job is professionalizing students, right? And getting them prepare for the real world. But, you know, again, just pushing us to think, not choose, but just think. You know, we want, while they're here, we really want to nurture them. We really want to meet them where they're at. It doesn't mean we can't have conversations about how important timing is, and particularly for whatever field that we're in. And again, maybe it's that you do it for some assignments and not others, right? It doesn't have to be a blanket thing in your course, right? So again, just pushing us to think about, right, the policies that we're putting in place. But you know, progress is progress, right? And it sounds like you're doing things that are working for students. So let's all just keep thinking, right, and pushing ourselves towards that. And it's going to look different for all of us. So thank you to those of you who shared out. This you'll find on the slide. This is one of the slides. I just wanted to throw out some suggested reading if anybody is interested in delving more into the perspective shift that it really requires to really dive into a lot of the things that we're talking about. We're asking you to go above and beyond, right? We're asking you to go above the course outline of record that you're given, the policies that, you know, that we already have in place. We're asking you to put in more time, energy, and effort, right? To accept late work maybe, right? And what that means, right? In terms of grading, right? Things later in the semester. So we are asking you to do more. And so I think that for some people, it might be beneficial to go beyond just kind of the things that we're talking about and read more about the kind of mental shift, I think, that is really beneficial to doing this kind of work. This is just a suggested reading list. If you need something to read over winter break, my personal favorite, if I was going to suggest one of these to you, is the very first one, Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom by Bell Hooks. it totally transformed me as an educator and really made it so that I saw myself not just an educator, not just as a professor, but as someone who was contributing to liberation, right, in society, and was pushing us towards freedom, right, and really transgressing, right, these old, traditional, antiquated ways that we think about education and our role in it as instructors. So it's a wonderful, I feel, transformative book. If you're looking for out of these four which ones, but we all got a bunch of, you gotta figure out which practice you're going to implement. So you may not have time for this, but I wanted to throw it out there. So what is next? Okay, so everything that we talked about today, the three different options, right? The culturally responsive pedagogical practices, the curriculum changes, the grading equity, and the OER. What I've done is I've created a resource page on our Canvas page. So this is our Canvas page for the grant. And if you scroll all the way down, so not this set of resources, but these resources here, culturally responsive and equity-minded practices for implementation. So everything that we talked about, I have a host of different resources, some that are kind of theoretical, giving you deeper understanding of the approach, and definitely some that are applicable and practical, right? How do I apply this in my class? So you see, I have a section on culturally responsive pedagogy, on equitable grading, and on open educational resources. So we only scratched the surface, right, today with the session. And so right now you can go into our Canvas page and you'll see these resources. So if you found yourself kind of attracted to the equitable grading stuff, dig into this section, right? If you're like, I want to learn more about OER, lots of resources here for you. So we want you to dig further into the options that you're interested in implementing. Maybe you still want to learn more about all of them, but remember, 1 and 1, right? Again, don't get overwhelmed. One course, implementing one new practice, okay? 1 and 1. You're also going to complete your implementation plan. That's the next step. So the plan is due by January 31st, 2025. So let fall happen, get your grades in, do your SLO assessments, have a holiday, take a breather, right? And then start working on that implementation plan. So I'm going to follow up our session today with an announcement that will link you to the plan through the Canvas page. So you can see it. It's a Google Doc. We've tried to make it very concise and very straightforward. So we're not looking for some 3, 4, 5-page document. You're going to be responding to very specific questions. And basically, we want to know which course are you going to implement the plan in? What is the success rate, the previous success rate for that course? What do you plan on implementing? What's your rationale for choosing it? That's basically what it is. And again, that's due by January 31st, because again, we want you to have that in place. We want you to have those decisions made because we want you implementing in the spring, okay? The last thing is we have an optional, implementation plan guidance session. We're thinking of this as like an open office hour. So there'll be no presentation, no work. It's not a workshop. It's literally myself and my other co-faculty lead, Jennifer Ortiz, and then the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness. Our tour is going to be back with us, and we're going to be sitting in that Zoom from 6:30 to 7:30, waiting for folks to come in, just like we be sitting for students, right? waiting for students, for y'all to come in and ask any questions and get any clarification that you need. Again, it'll be both the faculty leads, myself and Jennifer for the grant, and the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness. So if you have questions about your particular data, he'll be there to answer that. We're doing that on December 12th from 6:30 to 7:30. And again, that is optional, okay? So here's what is next. Dig into those resources, figure out what you want to implement, and complete that implementation plan and start implementing, right? Prepare that course, right? For you to make that implementation, right? For you to add that practice, right? That you're going to implement in your spring 2025 course. Okay, so we made it, y'all. We made it, okay? So thank you everyone for coming. You know, when we set these dates way at the beginning of the semester, it's like, oh yeah, this sounds like a good idea. Like 6:30 to 8, now it's like post daylight savings or whatever. It feels like it's 11 o'clock. So I really want to thank everybody for being here, for participating, for making an effort, right? For I can't even think anymore, but for being here for our Black students, right? That's the gist of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording and I will get this posted.